This is episode 6 of the Creator-God theory of the Atonement. I've titled it Distortions and More Distortions, and Why Ignoring the How of the Atonement Doesn't Work. In this episode, we're going to address the claim that when it comes to the atonement itself, the only thing that really matters is the fact that it happened, not how it happened. But ignoring the how doesn't work, because the meaning of what Christ did for us depends on how it was accomplished. And if the how is imagined in ways that contradict eternal law, it isn't the atonement itself that's distorted, it's our gospel understanding of it. And that distorted understanding not only pulls us further from the truth, it opens the door for distortions and more distortions to slip in under the revered cover of the atonement. In our last episode, we asked the question, problems? What problems? And this is where the disconnect comes into focus. For most Latter-day Saints, the idea of a problem with the atonement, especially with its how, has simply never existed. They don't ignore the problem. They don't even see one. Let's look at why. First, Latter-day Saints see the issue as settled. We believe the how was already resolved by our gospel teachings and the authority of Scripture. Second, with that conviction, it's simply assumed that the how has been resolved. So the question of any unresolved issues never even comes up. Third, from our perspective, the matter of the atonement's legitimacy has always seemed final and closed. And lastly, because it's already considered closed, if the question is raised at all, it gets dismissed, brushed aside as a pseudo-problem, a made-up issue. And this, as we first noted back in episode 1's background story, is one of the key reasons behind the atonement crisis, as most Latter-day Saints have no idea a problem even exists. That's why this disconnect matters so much, because this assumption has never really been questioned or scrutinized. But the reason we're so confident in this assumption may surprise you. Let's turn to that next. So, what is it that gives us, as Latter-day Saints, such confidence in the assumption that there's no problem with the atonement, that our gospel understanding is both settled and certain, so much so that the question of any unresolved issues never even comes up? The answer lies in what we've always regarded as the atonement's strongest, most sacred, and most revered links in a continuous and unbroken chain: its vicarious nature and its infinite nature. The point is, these two links aren't seen as weak points at all. Quite the opposite. They've long been regarded as the very foundation of how we Latter-day Saints understand the atonement, as expressed in the words of Amulek in the Book of Mormon, which bring both themes together. I know that Christ shall come to take upon him the transgressions of his people and atone for the sins of the world. For it is expedient that an atonement be made, or else all mankind must unavoidably perish. And it shall not be a human sacrifice, but an infinite and eternal sacrifice, the great and last sacrifice of the Son of God, yea, infinite and eternal. It's as if Amulek were saying to his people, to truly understand how the atonement works, don't look to man, look to God, and look to its vicarious, infinite, and eternal nature. And that's exactly right. If we want to truly understand how the atonement works, we begin by looking to God, rather than man, and then to the atonement itself, to its vicarious and infinite nature. That's the order. First God, then the atonement's defining aspects. But here's the disconnect. After looking to God, we too often stop short, treating those defining aspects as though their definitions were the full explanation, instead of looking into them for deeper understanding. Looking to them means treating them as the complete explanation of the how. Looking into them means treating them as pivotal starting points toward a full explanation. That disconnect is crucial. To make it clear, let's map it out as a simple framework with 2 parts and 4 steps. This framework for understanding the disconnect between assuming the how of the atonement is already resolved and the somehow that lingers begins with part 1, looking to them. Step 1 is that redirection. Here, Amulek first directs us to God, not man, and then to the atonement's vicarious and infinite nature. Step 2 defines the terms vicarious meaning in place of another, and infinite meaning without limit. Part 2, looking into them, moves beyond definition to probing deeper. Step 3 asks the right questions. How can the innocent justly suffer for the guilty? How can the infinite fit into a finite reality? Step 4 then tests the answers against eternal law. Do they violate the moral laws of justice and mercy, or the natural laws of identity and causality? Until we move from the first part to the second, the how of the atonement remains unresolved. And this is where the disconnect appears. Too often, we stop with part 1, looking to the atonement's vicarious and infinite nature, satisfied with their definitions, as though that were the full answer. But definitions are not explanations. To know that vicarious means in place of another, and infinite means without limit, is only the beginning. The real work begins in part 2, looking into these terms, probing their depth and asking the hard questions. How can the innocent justly suffer for the guilty? How can the infinite fit within the finite? And only then, by testing those answers against eternal laws of justice, mercy, identity, and causality, do we begin to uncover the true how of the atonement. And yet the real work never begins, because we Latter-day Saints assume all the whys and wherefores are already answered, so the how of the atonement is treated as case closed. Here's how we typically respond to every journalistic question about the atonement, including its how, who was involved, Jesus Christ, the Son of God. What happened? He died on the cross for the sins of the world. When did it take place? Approximately AD 3036. Where did it take place? From Gethsemane to Calvary. Why did it happen? To redeem mankind from the fall. How did it happen? Amulek's answer is clear. First look to God, not man, then to the atonement's vicarious and infinite nature, where one suffers in place of another, without limit. And it all ends with a confident, even thunderous declaration, case closed. But the problem is this: the case isn't closed, it's only assumed to be. By failing to probe deeper, we leave the hard questions unasked, questions of justice, mercy, identity, and causality, and unasked questions remain unanswered. It is this very disconnect that has opened the door to distortions and more distortions, spreading throughout the Christian world and even among us as Latter-day Saints. So let's take a closer look at that next. For Latter-day Saints, the how of the atonement and its two strongest links, its vicarious and infinite nature, answering how Christ could suffer instead of us, and how his sacrifice could cover all people across all time. With those definitions in hand, the response has been confident, as in case closed. But the problem is, the case isn't closed, it's only assumed to be. The question still remains, but how? How can a vicarious sacrifice atone for the sins of the world without violating the foundations of justice? And how can an infinite sacrifice span all people and all time? For now, the only answer we are left with is somehow. It is at this very point, when the how of the atonement turns into a somehow, that the disconnect occurs. What Latter-day Saints assume to be the atonement's strongest links, its vicarious and infinite nature, in fact, become its weakest. Most members may be unaware of this problem, but our scholars are not. As BYU professor Robert L. Millett admitted, but like the rest of the Christian world, we cannot rationally comprehend the work of God. We cannot grasp how one man can assume the effect of another man's error, and, more especially, how one man, even a man possessed of the power of God, can suffer for another's sins. The atonement, the greatest act of mercy and love in all eternity, though real, is, for now, incomprehensible and unfathomable. Sadly, it is the acceptance of this incomprehensible and unfathomable somehow in our understanding of the atonement that opens the door to distortions and more distortions that have spread throughout Christianity and even among us as Latter-day Saints. To illustrate, let's run quickly through 7 gospel concepts, among dozens more, that have been distorted by the incomprehensible, unfathomable somehow of the atonement's vicarious and infinite nature. We begin with the gospel concept of sin, which has been distorted into original sin, wherein we are fallen and lost no matter what. Next is grace, distorted into free grace, wherein believers are saved no matter what. Then faith, twisted into blind faith, wherein we are to believe no matter what. After that comes obedience, turned into blind obedience, wherein we are to obey no matter what. Service, into selfless service, wherein we are to serve no matter what. Sacrifice, into self-sacrifice, wherein we are to sacrifice no matter what. And finally love, distorted into unconditional love, wherein we are to love even enemies, no matter what. In short, notice how in every case the qualifier at the start begins the distortion and the no matter what at the end completes it. And that's the problem. Truth is contextual, but the added no matter what rips each principle out of its proper context, making it absolute and non-contextual. That is the pattern. Distort the meaning with a qualifier, then dogmatize it by making it absolute, regardless of context. The individual effect of these distortions is staggering, yet the cumulative effect is even more devastating. Layer them together, and even something as sacred as divine love gets recast into the most absurd and abhorrent of doctrines. To show just how far these misunderstandings can go, I'll close this episode with an illustration from one of the most unexpected sources, the beloved Christian apologist and scholar, C.S. Lewis. In his classic, The Four Loves, Lewis treats divine love, agape, the highest form of love, in a way that reveals just how absurd and repugnant these distortions can become. It is here that we need to stop and catch our breath, because things are about to get darker, stranger, and far more bizarre. For Lewis, too, divine love, agape, was defined as selfless, self-sacrificial, and unconditional. But his analogy is not only more graphic than most, it is also far more candid in laying bare exactly what this celebrated Christian notion of divine love amounts to in practice. He writes, "God, who needs nothing, loves into existence wholly superfluous creatures in order that he may love and perfect them. If I may dare the biological image, God is a host who deliberately creates his own parasites, causes us to be, that we may exploit and take advantage of him. Herein is love. This is the diagram of love himself, the inventor of all loves." Yes, you heard that correctly. According to C.S. Lewis, God is a divine host who deliberately creates his own parasites. And who are the parasites? Us. Why would God do this? Lewis tells us, so that we might exploit and take advantage of him, not temporarily, but forever. Herein is love, this host-parasite relationship, to be the very essence of divine love. It should be obvious to all that the incomprehensible and unfathomable somehow of the atonement is written all over this distortion of God's love. For if the atonement is the greatest act of divine love in all eternity, then how we understand it will inevitably define how we understand divine love itself. In short, get the atonement wrong, and we get divine love wrong, and soon those distortions become part of the Christ-like ideal we are expected to emulate, for herein is love. And yet, in daring to portray divine love in this host-parasite imagery, C.S. Lewis unwittingly pulled back the curtain on what was there all along, an absurd, repugnant, and bizarre distortion of love. Most Christians embrace it only in softer terms, calling it Christ-like love that is selfless, self-sacrificial, and unconditional. But Lewis, in his candor, showed us what those terms really amount to in practice: a host-parasite relationship, with the Christian as host and one's neighbor as parasite, the exploited and the exploiter, all in the name of Christ-like love. If this eye-opening analogy shows us anything, it is this: when the how of the atonement collapses into somehow, distortions multiply. The point is this: if a scholar as brilliant and respected as C.S. Lewis can get the atonement so wrong that divine love becomes a host-parasite relationship, where Christ-like love means a selfless, self-sacrificial willingness to be endlessly exploited, then surely it's time we reconsider the dangers of ignoring the how of the atonement. And the danger is real, for even our own LDS scholars and apostles have admitted it. Robert L. Millett called the atonement incomprehensible and unfathomable. And near the end of his heralded work, Jesus the Christ, Elder James E. Talmage reached the same perplexing conclusion. Talmage wrote, "Christ's agony in the garden is unfathomable by the finite mind, both as to intensity and cause. In some manner actual and terribly real, though to man incomprehensible, the Savior took upon himself the burden of the sins of mankind from Adam to the end of the world." So while the average Latter-day Saint may assume no problem exists, our own scholars, theologians, and apostles have acknowledged the problem and the danger that lurks in the incomprehensible and unfathomable realm of the somehow. The same danger lurks in the many theories of the atonement, theories I call tumbleweed theories, brittle, rootless, and never anchored in eternal law. In our next episode, we'll put these theories to the test, using 6 clear criteria to see whether any of these centuries-old explanations of the atonement can stand against eternal truth, or whether they simply collapse into an incomprehensible and unfathomable somehow.